I call the honourable member Chester Borrows.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I too get to my feet to say that it's good news in the regions, and I know that those people on the other side of the House may not be all that happy about that, but in South Taranaki we had some real good news on the weekend around the realignment of the Normanby Overbridge. And that's a big thing for us. And I know that people in South Taranaki are pretty good at political memorials. Not too many years ago, when a certain Minister of Education closed a number of schools around Taranaki, a big sign appeared on the side of the road that said, "Open season on mallards." And after last week's announcements about the realignment of the Normanby Bridge, it wouldn't surprise me at all if some big round bales were got together and a huge effigy of Jerry Brownlee was built beside the Normanby Overbridge. The Normanby Overbridge has been a death trap in South Taranaki for 20 years. It's claimed 21 lives over 20 years. It's been a blight on our landscape and on State Highway 3, and all that has been done over a number of years is to move a speed limit and put a few signs around it, and it has never, ever been good enough. And just a few years ago, land was bought alongside the railway line so that the road can be reconfigured to take away the need to travel over this overbridge. There were 3 of them constructed in the 20s. They were all identical, and one of them has been completely realigned, and the other 2 continue to be a trap for motorists. But we had the land, we had the plans, but we didn't have the dough. And a series of incidents around the country that had detracted from the government's ability to be able to construct this bridge, such as the earthquake, such as Pike River, such as the collapse of South Canterbury Finance, etc., meant that these projects had to be prioritised, and I was absolutely ecstatic to find on the weekend that bridge is going to be started next year. And it's done at a time when, as the previous speaker Jonathan Young said, there are other road projects happening in Taranaki that have been given the same priority, albeit in South Taranaki we think that road safety is a little bit more important than a bottleneck. Good to see that it's happened. Now, the word from the other side is that that's an election bribe. Apparently, it's an election bribe when you find some money to do away with a death trap. Well, if ever I saw an election bribe, it was coming up to the 1999 election. And what happened then, Mr Rockenvold, was that the then would-be Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition at the time, Helen Clark, flew by chopper to a little place called Ruatiti with the then Associate Minister of Transport, or would-be Associate Minister of Transport, Harry Dynhoven, and stood on another bridge. They stood on another bridge, and that was a bridge that had superseded one that had collapsed, and there was a death on that bridge. And it's known because a beekeeper fell through that bridge and was killed. We know that the farmer was a man called Berryman, and the Leader of the Opposition at that time, a couple of months before the election, pledged that post-election, should they be in government, then Labor would negotiate with Mr Berryman around costs. The costs that he had incurred, having been charged before the court, having had his home burnt down and emergency services unable to be able to get there, and the losses that he had incurred. They made big promises prior to the election, and yet in 9 years in government they did nothing. They made one offer which was sought to be negotiated, and they refused to negotiate, having stood in the election campaign and said the government should be negotiating with Mr and Mrs Berryman to put this right. And in 9 years they didn't. And I'm pleased to say that one of my first accomplishments as the member for Wanganui was to go to Cabinet and to ask them if they would sort out this issue, and they did. So to have the other side of the House talk about election bribes last weekend, when that is their history, is huge. Another good point to make is this. We know that the flea on the tail of the dog in the next government, if Labor was ever that next government, would be the Greens, and what we know about the Greens is they hate roads. They don't want to build any roads. This Normanby Overbridge would never be built if the Labor government ever got elected, and that's the message for the people of the Wanganui electorate.
The Honourable Phil Goff.
Speaker, we've just heard the National